Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for another week of life and that you've brought us to this day of rest. Father, we pray for rest and refreshing. We ask that you would not only grant us the physical rest of body and mind, but we also want to be renewed as we reconsecrate ourselves to you. We want to be fit for purpose for the work that is near at hand, that is getting closer and closer. So as we go over these studies, we pray for the Holy Spirit to help us. If there are things that we don't understand, that maybe they can be clarified, where there are questions, we will get closer to answers. Whatever it is, Lord, we want a closer revelation of you so that we can rightly represent you to others as the test draws near. And so we pray for our brothers and sisters across the world, especially we think of our Fijian ministry, the Islands of the Sea ministry, as they have their fellowship this weekend, the youth camp and combined fellowship, that you would be with them. And all those that are preparing for Sabbath, may they have a special blessing too, as they prepare to down tools and pick up the new tools to go digging in your word. So we leave ourselves in your care now. We invite your presence, not only amongst us, but in us, as we ask that Jesus Christ would abide in our hearts through the power of the Holy Spirit. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So recently, there was a camp meeting for the French ministry that went across the world. And because the French ministry is so large and incorporates so many different islands, the time that they had to organise for the speakers, for Elders Tess and Parminda, wasn't that conducive to our people being able to watch all the messages. So I know that there's quite a few of us here that haven't watched the French camp meeting yet for various reasons. So we're going to go to one of those presentations, and I'm going to bring it up on screen share. It's not the first one. We're going to jump into the presentation number 3 of Elder Tess's. So this is part 3. It's called Cause and Effect. It was presented on the 27th of October. And we'll start reading, and we'll probably share some reading as we move on, but I'll make a start. And Elder Tess starts this presentation. She has redrawn the board. And I phoned a friend and got somebody to redraw the board for us as it was at the beginning of that presentation. And if we go to the second paragraph, Elder Tess said, I have left up our Amiga history. That Amiga history is our history. For now, our line of Eden to Eden has been removed, and please try to keep those things in your mind. So what are the things that we need to keep in mind about the line of Eden to Eden? Does anybody remember? What was it about the line of Eden to Eden?
Equality.
Equality, yes, yes. So what is it about equality that we would place on that line from Eden to Eden? It's a large line. It takes in the whole of most of the great controversy on this earth. What I'm looking for is the word restoration. So when we go from Eden to Eden, what God is doing is he's restoring. And the principle that we get from that is that when we think of that history, we have to look at it as an improvement, as a process of improvement from when God began in Eden and to when it will be that final restoration. And that's not how often we think of it. We Christians in particular look at the world and think how bad it's gotten. But we can actually show on the lines that the world has actually improved. As much as we can look at it and see the horror and tragedy and ugliness that's in the world, there has been a general improvement. And we can see that through equality. So that improvement would have happened with Adam and Eve, regardless of whether they sinned or not. If they hadn't have sinned, there still would have been an improvement. They did not fully understand the character of God. They would have grown in that knowledge. So the Eden to Eden line is a line of improvement or restoration. And this is what we need to keep in mind. So our third paragraph, we have discussed the agricultural model. The only point we wanted to take from that model is that there is no rain in harvest. So there are a number of lines that Elder Tess was going to use during this camp meeting to bring into our history, in particular the history of 2019 to 2021. The first one was the line of agriculture, and she spent a bit of time on that. And the thing we need to remember that she was honing in on is that there is no rain in harvest. The next paragraph, we have harvest in our current dispensation for the priests. So this dispensation is a dispensation of harvest. Typifying the 144,000, we know rain to be as symbolic of a message. And so we make the point that there is no new message in a harvest. And that is for our own safety as we wrestle to understand the message of the last dispensation. Why is that for our own safety? Why is it essential that we have no rain in harvest? Can I see the chat? Yes, thank you, Brother Esteban. So we have to process the previous message. So if we think about that more from an agricultural perspective, right now, where are we? In Australia, we are getting toward, we're middle of November. The farmers around here want to harvest their crops. Problem is it's been raining, which is a bad thing to say in Australia because we never say no to rain, except for this time of year. So when they get in their canola and their lucerne and their straw, whatever they're growing, their wheat, they need to get that in. And the time of growing that is before harvest. So you need that rain. When it, to make that, the point of the harvest is that you get fruit that's going to be fit for purpose. It's not just about the harvest. You need to be able to take that fruit and then go and do with it what you need to do. That bread needs to go to the mill. It needs to be made to flour and to bread and to feed other people. The canola needs to be ground into oil to feed other people. Whatever that, the lucerne, it's got to feed the cows. So if the rain spoils it, you spoil the end benefit of that crop that in the first place. So the rain is a message. It has fed us, but we have not arrived because that message has to produce in us an effect that will make us fit for purpose, that can feed other people. And so in this time period, we've got to make sure that we're not being rained on, that we don't get spoiled, that the work that's gone on in the previous two dispensations has brought enough fruit that we can be ground and milled and then, you know, feed some 10, some 100, whatever. So it's essential that we don't have a new message in this time period for on the line of the priests. So let's go to the next paragraph. This is harvest. It is also known as the time of trouble. So time of trouble. You can get that from the story of Jacob and from the great controversy. In the previous dispensation, God was doing a work. When you see God doing a work, what you see playing out is part of the warfare of the great controversy, which means he is not the only one at work. When you look back at Millerite history, it was as if Satan was restrained so that the message could spread. And then when you come into the time of trouble, that restraint comes to an end, and Satan has the ability to attack in a way he didn't have before. You know that if he could bring about the death decree in the Sunday law history, he would, but he can't. So there's this restraint until the time of trouble when Satan decides he'll have this last effort to destroy. So this is a really interesting point. So harvest is the time of trouble. We know we get this from the Bible and from the spirit of prophecy. So time of trouble is just part of the story of the great controversy. So you've got controversy between Christ and Satan. So God's doing a work, Satan's got to be doing a work. But when we think of the Millerite time history, when did he do that work? Sure, he was, there was a certain amount of work he was doing, but it really wasn't until 1850 that he was kind of let loose. And we can get that from the story that is explained in early writings and elsewhere. But early writings, it does a really good job of that, of saying when Satan made his plans and he was really able to work in a way that he hadn't been able to previously. So we see that in our time period, 2019 to 21, it's been unprecedented how Satan has been able to work. She says you can expand that out and see the true and the counterfeit, God working through Millerite history. And then you have the ability of Satan to come in with World War I and World War II. But you also see this within a reform line in the time of trouble. And so that's what we're talking about. This is our, in a reform line, we can really see that in our history, but on a big picture, when the Millerite time history was finished, then you can see how the world came together to war. So it is as if there's a restraint all the way until November 9. November 8, we were at a camp meeting in Australia. That's just over 12 months ago. The fires came too close and we left that venue. 2 weeks later, it burnt to the ground. Immediately, there were the attempts of Satan to destroy the work of the movement through November 9 itself. So that's the only error that is in this study, because it wasn't 2 weeks later, it was about 2 days. Actually, it was about 4 days. We left on the Friday, and then I think the fire came in the following Tuesday. So it was only a matter of days. So we really felt that effect, how it just turned everything upside down here. We know we can overlay World War I and World War II. What we have up here is our dispensation. So she's pointing to this, 219 to 221. Harvest, Jacob's time of trouble. What we want to do is understand it through our reform lines, particularly the end of ancient Israel and the beginning of modern Israel. But we also want to understand it through the model of agriculture, the lines of revolutions, the line of Christ as a priest, and also the great controversy model of Sunday law, death decree, time, second advent. So these are these lists that she's put on the side here. We want to take these lines and bring their relevancy into our dispensation. And what Elder Teth has also brought in there is the model of the great controversy, where you would call this, where you would have Sunday law, a death decree, time, second advent. So during the time of trouble, we would call this, if this was this is the great controversy, then this would be Sunday law. This would be the second advent. And during that time, we know there are two waymarks. Boston, Concord, Exeter, and then the test, if we were in the Millerite time history. So Boston, Concord is the death decree. And then at Exeter, they were given the time, or in the Great Controversy, the day and the hour was given them. That was to point out the second advent. So these are the lines that we wish to bring to this dispensation. We have looked at agriculture as much as we're going to, so no new message. November 9, 2019, the time of trouble begins. There's an immediate attack on the work of this movement. And now Elder Tess is going to take us to some articles. This is an article from The Guardian, and the links are here. The first case of someone suffering from COVID-19 can be traced back to the 17th of November, according to media reports on unpublished Chinese government data. And here's the media report. The report in the South China Morning Post said Chinese authorities had identified at least 266 people who contracted the virus last year and who came under medical surveillance. And the earliest case was the 17th of November, weeks before authorities announced the emergence of the new virus. So what's that telling us? So these are the ones, or the people, that have come under medical surveillance. The earliest case was November 17 that they can pinpoint. So we do see a pandemic. We know from the line of World War I that this is the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. So what is the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk? This here. If we took the line of World War I, when we go into that history, that treaty was signed March 3. The first known case of the Spanish flu was March 4, immediately after that treaty. So when we bring in the history of World War I, it brings in the pandemic. And what I said in that first presentation is that God prepared us just in time with our understanding of the medical system, vaccination, and conspiracy theories. Because when it comes to COVID-19, these conspiracy theories have come in like a flood. They have destroyed Levites and Nethinims. God built us an ark with the message of conspiracy theories. So what is, would somebody like to put that paragraph in their own words? What is being said in that paragraph? Did God let us down by not allowing us, or not, I guess allows the wrong word, but we didn't get to predict the pandemic? Is that a problem?
I was thinking, is it two streams of information?
Yeah, would you like to say more on that, Greg?
Well, the time of the COVID, I'm just reading that sentence, during that time, conspiracy theories came in leaps and bounds, so that the two streams of information actually got more abundant and further apart.
Thank you. So that idea of a stream, it was going to build into a flood. And so you needed to be in the right stream. One of those, there's a flood coming of that one particular stream. I would say there's a flood coming of the good stream as well as the bad stream. But if we were prepared for this, we were prepared for the pandemic by understanding that wrong stream of information. We could face the pandemic and not have that fear of confusion, not have that fear of the medical establishment and the science and the vaccinations. God built us an ark for that flood in the message that he gave us. If we were to take the line of Noah and place it here, this is when the flood comes. And those that believed in the message that was settled into that understanding of a right stream was safe, even though they might have felt the plague itself, the pandemic. Just like the early Israelites had to experience the first plagues, so we had to experience this pandemic, but we were prepared for it. I just think that's just wonderful of God, the mercy of God. We didn't need to. What would have been the point of predicting the pandemic if we didn't know about vaccines and science and we were believing in a wrong stream? I think God knew what we needed. This should really build our trust and faith in him. And so she says, people have been lost. People have been just swept away. I was thinking blown away, swept away with this flood of information. And next paragraph. Then we began to go into a study of ancient Israel. I want to put that to one side for now. We will come back to it. What I would like to do is look at the external. We will look at the external and identify the framework. Then as we look at the framework, we'll apply it to the internal. So I think that will make sense as we go on. Elder Tess says, I've been saying for some time now, we need to understand waymarks better, that our understanding is too narrow. So I would like to offer some suggestions of how better we can understand the nature of a waymark. I have already said before, Boston, Concord, Exeter, test. So this is what we've got here, where our dispensations are divided up into those 4 key waymarks: Boston, Concord, Exeter, and then it's tested based on Millerite history. And that this waymark of Concord is May 25. So that's been in the public arena for a while. This is Concord here. And in our time, it is May 25. And these dates mark the external events. November 9, 2016 is not when Acts 27 was understood. That occurred in the time period, but it marks the external event, the election of Donald Trump. September 11, we mark the external event. So in going through the external, we can build a framework and then we will take that to our internal experience. So it's really important that we understand these external waymarks. So I want us to consider 1989. What date do you associate with 1989? I think everyone will say the fall of the Berlin Wall, November 9. I want to offer a different date. I have got a few quotes to read. The first quote is Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. It's titled September 11, 1989, when Hungary tore a hole in the Iron Curtain. So she's going to point out that this is 1989, 9/11. And this is the article she's just pulled out here. You'll see the link, and we'll put this on the, in fact, you could probably PDF it and I'd send it to your email and just put it up if people want to download it. Thank you. September 11, 1989, when Hungary tore a hole in the Iron Curtain. 30 years ago, Hungary lifted restrictions on travel to Austria, enabling tens of thousands of East Germans to flee to the West. The September 1989 events in Hungary are often described as the first cracks in the Berlin Wall. So before something's going to break, it's got to crack. This is a 2009 article from the LA Times. And this is by Michael Meyer. So you may be familiar with Michael Meyer. He authored the book 1989, The Year That Changed the World. Hungary had elected a more progressive, West-centred government. Back in August 19, some rebellious people decided to have a stab at the Soviet Empire, and to keep themselves safe, they just said that they were having a picnic. They advertised it and said, "Everyone come to our picnic." By the way, it's on the Hungarian border between East and West, and if you want to cut part of that fence that separates East and West and go for a stroll across the border, we won't stop you. It was a not so subtle protest. Buses started rolling up to this picnic. It is known as the Pan-European picnic. About 700 East Germans came to that picnic and then fled across the border. And because the Hungarian government had looked the other way, it placed them in an awkward position, because now people knew this could happen. The government of Hungary would be held responsible every time people tried to cross and were killed. So this is the first crack. When Hungary opened its border, it was a bit cheeky of them. And this is the article from September 13, 2009. Michael Meyer wrote this article, and we've got it here. We might read it. And with somebody, who have we got with us? Maybe Sister Lynn, are you able to unmute yourself and read this article for us?
Yes, sure. Now, where am I starting? Sorry. From
just
the beginning?
under the date, Michael Meyer.
Yep, okay. Michael Meyer, Newsweek's bureau chief for Germany and Eastern Europe in 1989, is the author of The Year That Changed the World. 20 years ago, on September 11, 1989, the plug was pulled on the bathtub of Soviet Empire. At the stroke of midnight, tiny communist Hungary threw open the gates to freedom and the West. Tens of thousands of people surged across the suddenly unguarded border. Scenes of jubilation, of families reunited after decades of captivity in the Eastern Europe, flashed around the world. Newsweek's cover dubbed it the Great Escape. From one day to the next, Americans awoke to a startling new reality. Suddenly, it was possible to imagine the unimaginable, the fall of the Iron Curtain and an end to the Cold War. The coming months will see a crescendo of 20th anniversary commemorations of communism's final days, culminating on November 9, the night the Berlin Wall came down. For many, Americans especially, the fall of the wall was a glorious moment, emblematic of the West's victory in the Cold War. We won. Yes, if you watched the East Bloc's disintegration from the ground, as I did over the fateful year, you saw it as more ambiguous. The founding fiction of our Cold War triumph, that it validated decades of containment and militarist confrontation, gives way to a more nuanced appreciation of the other forces that were at work, among them the actions of others, often unnoticed by the rest of the world. The Great Escape made history, but the real story, largely untold, is how it came to pass. Every great event has its hidden turning points. Victory in World War II, some say, hinged on Operation Fortitude, Britain's legendary gambit to fool Hitler into thinking the Allied invasion of 1944 would come near Calais rather than the beaches of Normandy. Similarly, the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War had their roots in part in a bold gamble that unfolded all but invisibly one fine summer day in 1989 on the Austrian-Hungarian frontier. The date was August 19, Pan-European Picnic. Fewer than 700 East Germans left that day, but it was enough. In the days after the Pan-European Picnic, what had been a fearful trickle quickly became a flood. As for Nemeth, he was proved a prophet. Within weeks, Honecker was ousted as Politburo pushed. Sorry, can't do that one. Within 3 months, the Berlin Wall fell. East Germany collapsed. Revolution swept Eastern Europe, and the Soviet Empire was no more.
Thank you. Nemeth was the Prime Minister of Hungary. So what you saw was an overturn there, and then, it just sort of swept across. So thank you, Lynn. We'll go on and read. So you understand what happened there. This was the cracks. He's saying that he's creating a story, or he's seeing the story. He's saying it's nuanced. It's just that there's players behind the scene, that sometimes this history just gets a bit lost. This is the National Security Archive. They are going to give this history back to March 3 and trace the events from March 3, 1989. They will mark August 19, the Pan-European picnic. But they say that the fate of the Berlin Wall may well have been sealed on September 11. Here was when the Hungarian Reform Communist government took down its own Iron Curtain. August 19 was about 700 people. Then they closed off that border again. September 11, they properly took down their own wall or curtain, and 30,000 people fled. August 19, 700, September 11, 30,000. It's the crack in the Berlin Wall when Hungary opened its border. So, yes, again, this is Nemeth, the Prime Minister, and he, we see that what happened on a local level, at a picnic, now became, I guess, part of a government policy. So we write up here 1989. And we can mark September 11. So 11/9 to, and this is, I guess, our dating to, do we do our dating? We do, don't we? 11/9. No, we don't. Better do the 9/11 to 11/9. And we'll read, who else have we got? Sister Josephine, are you able to read this article?
Yes, I'll try.
Thank you.
Just a minute. Okay. Oh, trying to. There we are. 2009, the National Security Archive. The documents show that the Berlin Wall actually started falling on March 13, 1989, when Hungarian Prime Minister Miklos Nemeth informed Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev of the decision of the Hungarian Central Committee to completely remove the electronic and technological defenses from the western and southern borders of Hungary. The Soviet leader did not react negatively to the news, but rather just said, "We are also becoming more open." This decision by the Hungarian Reform Communists and Gorbachev's acceptance of it made the first crack in the Berlin Wall. In May, the first dismantling of the technological defenses started on the southern border of Hungary. Over the summer, the Hungarians negotiated most actively with West German representatives and kept their Soviet ally informed, but tried to circumvent the East Germans. On August 19, Hungary organized its famous Pan-European picnic, where people were encouraged to come picnic along the Austrian-Hungary border near Sopron. A section of border was opened and some East German citizens were able to escape to Austria. The fate of the wall may well have been sealed on November 19, 1989, when the Hungarian Reform Communist government of Miklos Nemeth took down its own Iron Curtain, the barbed wire on the border with Austria, thus allowing East Germans who were vacationing in Hungary or taking refuge in the West German embassy to escape to the West.
Thank you, Sister Josephine.
You're
So
welcome.
we can mark September 11, 1989. Thank you. What you have is cause and effect. Cause with Hungary, September 11, effect with Berlin, November 9. Now we're going to go down to another history, 2001. What date do you want to mark? You are going to say 9/11. What are you going to say happened on that date? And then there's some interaction with the chat. Some have said the restraint of Islam, Twin Towers came down. Sister Tess asked, think prophetically, not just the external event. Third woe, beginning of civil war, spiritualism, arrival of the second angel. These are all things we mark at 9/11. What we have tended to say is the restraint of radical Islam. And what I would say is that is incorrect. What about Islam was restrained on September 11? They have, for an Islamic terrorist, a huge success. There is no restraint of Islam on September 11. But soon after, the United States invades Afghanistan. And I think that's kind of troubled people over the years. We've kind of tried, it's one of those things we tried to sort of fluff off, is what was restrained on that day? Oh, well, there were some bank accounts restrained. But I think they were pretty happy with their job on the day. So this is just giving so much better explanation of things that we've been a little fuzzy on. When we look at 1840 and the restraint of Islam, what was restrained? Terrorist organisations or states, countries, governments? It's an empire, a state, a country that was restrained in 1840. Sometimes I would suggest we spend too much time focusing on Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Not that we shouldn't focus on them, but we should not fail to focus on the Islamic countries of the Middle East. Because in prophecy and history, we tend to be looking at countries. The United States invades Afghanistan and tries to take down the Taliban government. It's the Taliban that need to be restrained. I'm going to read from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and I want us to note the date. It is October 18. They title this Afghanistan, the battle for Mazar-e-Sharif, seen as a turning point. So they haven't really engaged in this battle yet, but they're already realising that a fight for this city will be a turning point. So the United States is working with the Afghanistan Northern Alliance. The US has started bombing the front lines of the Taliban. The forces of the Northern Alliance seem ready to take Mazar-e-Sharif. It is the largest city in northern Afghanistan. Already they are marking that the fall of Mazar-e-Sharif should change the strategic balance in Afghanistan. Somebody's drawing. They are marking that already in October 18. So I might read this one. Afghanistan's Northern Alliance is on the offensive, and the United States seems to have responded to the group's call for bombing Taliban front lines to clear the way for an advance. US planes hit the Taliban front line north of Kabul yesterday, and further to the northwest, the forces of General Abdul Shahid Dostum seem ready to take Mazar-e-Sharif, the largest city in northern Afghanistan. And this is from Radio Free Europe. Oh, the next paragraph, reports indicate they are not well armed and are in fact outgunned by Taliban forces, which have several tanks and other armoured vehicles. The Taliban forces in the area are estimated to number 4,000 to 5,000. The Washington Post reported today that the militia, sensing the battle for Mazar-e-Sharif, represents a pivotal moment in the battle for Afghanistan and has rushed 1,000 more soldiers from Kunduz in the east to the battle scene. And then another quote from PBS, a frontline page. In their first major victory, Northern Alliance forces led by General Rashid Dostum and General Muhammad Atta with US Special Forces A teams 595 and 534 captured Taliban stronghold Mazar-e-Sharif on November 9, 2001. Thousands of Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters fled east to Kunduz. So just as this was predicted in October 18, this was the turning point. From the loss of this city, the Taliban quickly lost control of power in a matter of days. And now, so we're going to mark some dates then. So now we're looking at 2001. We've got our beginning date. It's 9/11. But we're going to see that thank you. We'll read another article. This is an article from the Washington Post, November 18, 2001. It describes the devastation caused by the US bombing, particularly to the front line of the Taliban. Thousands of its fighters suddenly fled to the south. They ran into abandoned buildings and hid out in bunkers. I'm just wondering, Brother Brendan, are you online? Are you able to read this article for us?
Can you hear me?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. So attacks from out of the blue. Bagram, Afghanistan, November 17. The narrow road running south toward Kabul is a testament to the devastation wrought by weeks of US aerial bombardment. Demolished tanks line the road, one flipped upside down, another with its gun turret sheared away. Discarded treads from tanks and other armoured vehicles litter the open field. On the side of the road nearby are two huge craters. This was the front line of Afghanistan's ruling Taliban until its fighters suddenly fled to the south this week. The strict Islamic movement had conquered most of the country and was backed by a formidable corps of Pakistani, Arab and other foreign fighters. They lived in abandoned buildings from long vacated villages or in a series of fortified bunkers dug into the hardened dirt. The turning point was the battle for the northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif, where US Special Forces operatives on the ground selected the bombing targets and directed the strikes. The fall of Mazar-e-Sharif on November 9 broke the Taliban aura of invincibility, sapped their morale, and started a domino effect of defections by regional commanders and provincial warlords.
Thank you, Brendan. Okay, so by November 14, the UN Security Council was already starting to set up a transitional government for Afghanistan. We have cause and effect, September 11 and November 9. Just write that. What happened November 9? So let's have a look. Who else have we got? I'm just, Sister Rachel, have you got audio? Are you able to read this for us? Maybe not. Okay. Oh, it's okay. She might not have. Sorry, I know. That's okay. The Taliban regime unravels rapidly after its loss at Mazar-e-Sharif on November 9, 2001, to forces loyal to Abdul Rashid Dostum, an ethnic Uzbek military leader. Over the next week, Taliban strongholds crumble after coalition and Northern Alliance offensive on Talakwan, Bamiyan, Herat, Kabul, and Jalalabad. No wonder you didn't want to read, Sister Rachel. On November 14, 2001, the UN Security Council passes Resolution 1378, calling for a central role for the United Nations in establishing a transitional administration and inviting member states to send peacekeeping forces to promote stability and aid delivery. So what happens? What we see is what was predicted is that when that city went, it was going to be the turning point. And then when that loss, November 9, came to fruition, we see that as a major event in that history. So we'll keep going for time. So we see the transition here from 2001, we see that story. So now I want to come to a little waymark now, 2016. We are going to get into our own history. We mark November 9, but what other date do we need to mark? So 2016 is the history of what? What's important about 2016? It's the election. So what other date do we need to mark? November 9 and December 19. So we'll write 11/9, and our other date is December 19. What happens December 19? The vote of the Electoral College. What you have is cause and effect. 2016, November 9 is cause, it's the vote. The effect is the Electoral College. It is at the Electoral College that he wins that election. And it is in that 2-month time period that Acts 27 begins to open up. So that's a nice clear one to see. You can really, well, they're all pretty clear, but that connection between 11/9 and December 19. We go from the vote to the actual confirmation of that election. 2018, external events, dates. What is December? We call this the Battle of Heraclea. So we're going down to 2018. And what are our dates? What are our events? When do we mark the beginning? When do we mark the end? Someone has suggested December 23. Elder Tess says, I may be inclined to push it back to December 21, but the 23rd you can still mark. The 23rd is significant, and it ends December 19, when Trump orders the full withdrawal of troops from Syria. So 2018, we mark the Battle of Heraclea. And then we mark December 19 as when the troops from Syria are fully withdrawn. So, all right, September 21. To December 19. So that is our history, the Battle of Heraclea, the fight between the United States and Russia. It centers around Ukraine, spheres of influence, and cyber war. I won't review the study of Heraclea, but we should be familiar with that time period. This is a 3-month time period. And in these 3 months, the midnight cry is given on the earth and the sea and the islands of the sea, or in Arkansas and in France and then in Fiji. At every waymark, we have a significant event. November 9, September 11, November 9, December 19. But we are actually interacting with a story that has a beginning and an end, or a cause and an effect. One of the reasons I have so much confidence in 2019 is why we might not understand November 9, we have the beginning date. What I would suggest would be the cause of whatever November 9 is. So let's wrap our mind again around that paragraph. Every waymark is a significant event. So we've got these waymarks, we've got these dates, but what is essential to these dates is the story. And a story has a beginning and an end. And she doesn't just call it a beginning and an end, it's a cause and an effect. A very strong link between this beginning and and the ends. And so when it comes to 2019, we have a beginning, But it's not just a date. That date is the beginning of a story. It's going to be then a cause. So when we go to look at the end to its corresponding date, we have to see its effect. There's going to be this thread. So right here, she says, there is an article by the New York Times that gives the significant events, the key date at the center of the Ukraine matter, and that's its title. It starts April 21, when Zelensky is elected president of the Ukraine. Immediately, President Trump places his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, as the intermediary between himself and Ukraine. May 6, they begin an attack on the new president of Ukraine and start a smear campaign against the new ambassador to the Ukraine and accuse her of disloyalty to the president. May 10, Giuliani tells Fox News that Zelensky was surrounded by operatives of the Democrat Party, enemies of the president and enemies of the United States. Shortly after, he begins to be warned that they are going to withhold the US aid. There are more events in that history. July 18, there's an announcement that Trump is going to freeze $391 million in Ukraine aid. July 25, Trump tells Zelensky what he wants in return for that US aid. That gets repeated August 9. August 12, the whistleblower files his complaint. September 1, Zelensky asks Mike Pence about that aid. Pence says, "Don't speak to me, speak to Gordon Sunderland." Sunderland tells a Ukrainian official not to expect the money until there is an investigation into Biden. You have all of this dirt happening behind the scenes. And then here's just a quote from the New York Times article. 2 days after a House committee is notified of the whistleblower complaint and opens an investigation, the White House reverses course and releases its hold on the military aid. Plans for Mr. Zelensky's CNN interview are scuttled. So what are they talking about in this article? She says, we discussed November 9 at the Oceania camp meeting a few weeks ago. What is November 9? Is it the Eastern Front or Western Front? We demonstrated how we can make an argument for both, but the emphasis is placed on the internal. What does that mean? That the emphasis is placed on the internal. Of course, when anything happens with information war and the Ukraine, Russia is involved. So we know that Russia's involved in this trouble between the USA and Ukraine. But this problem with Biden and Zelensky and all that's going on here, it's not an external problem. It's not a warfare with Russia. What is it? She says all of this centers around an internal fight within the United States. Trump is withholding nearly $400 million in Ukrainian aid. A whistleblower files a complaint. That complaint doesn't reach the ears of the House until September 9. The Democrats have control of the House. September 9, they hear of the complaint. They immediately launch an investigation, and this is what is going to lead to the impeachment. September 11, Trump caves. September 11, he released that $400 million in aid. Zelensky ends all plans to investigate Biden. John Bolton quits September 9. September 11, all of John Bolton's staff in the White House also resign. So all of this attempt of Trump to hold Ukraine to ransom comes to an end September 11. Remember, this is a battle in the West. 1989, we have September 11 to November 9, cause and effect. The Iron Curtain falls in Hungary. The wall falls in Berlin. 2001, cause and effect. There's an attack on the World Trade Centers. Restraint of radical Islam, that is a state government, the Taliban. So going back, we didn't, so we were looking at 2019, weren't we? We didn't put up the date. 2019, she's now starting to review. Started 9/11 and goes through to 11/9. I am just going to repeat those thoughts. In 1989, you have a story that happened. We tend to focus on the result of that story and not what leads to it. There are many events in that history. We mentioned August 19, but on investigation, you can particularly mark September 11 as the beginning of what will lead to the fall of the Berlin Wall. Hungary opens its borders and it leads to the fall of the wall in Berlin. In 2001, you also have a story. September 11 is the beginning, but we focus on that. Radical Islam attacks, but you don't have the restraint of Islam until November 9 in that famous battle, cause and effect. So we can see that a waymark, if you stand back, is in the context of a story, and prophecy identifies what that story is going to be about. You can see that in 2016, the cause is the popular vote. The effect is the electoral college vote. 2018, the cause is Donald Trump beginning to be antagonistic towards Putin. That sparks a fight between the two. The effect is Trump's loss of that fight, December 19. So when we come to November 9 last year, we are marking the date given to us by prophecy, but we need to look for the story. There has been many events and months-long fight over Ukraine and Trump's political interests. September 11, that aid is released, which is pretty much the surrender of Donald Trump. When we understand November 9, we will understand it in the context of that story. So I guess what we're seeing here is the thread that nothing just happens in a vacuum. All of these things have reasons and they have ongoing effects. If we can learn this from the past, we'll be able to apply it to the future. So why we have done all of this build-up is to understand Concord 2020. So Elder Tess has put a lot of emphasis on understanding what's happened here in November 9, 2019. Yes, we've got a date, but what was the story? What was the lead up to that story? What was the cause and the effect? And she's gone back over many lines. She's gone back to 1989, 2001, and so on. Because if we can understand the cause and effect here, we'll be able to understand the cause and effect in this dispensation we're now in. And we're looking at Concord in our history. Why we have done all this is to understand Concord 2020. We need to understand this waymark just as the disciples will look back and identify what happened at close of probation. But part of the process of doing that is understanding the nature of waymarks. Now, I think that's a really significant statement because when we think of close of probation for in the time of Christ, when we think of the disciples looking back at their close of probation, they're looking at AD 34 and they've got a date. The date is clear. The date's given to them in prophecy. It's a clear understanding of Daniel chapter 9. 70 weeks are determined or cut off for thy people. They got a date. What they've got to look for is the event that marks that date. And understanding that particular event, they have to understand the history of that year, the cause and the effect. They can go back to the cross. They can see that probation closed for leadership. And when they come to AD 34, you know, we know that the persecution's been going on for some time. There's been lots of persecution, but the stoning of Stephen is going to stand out as a particular event that's going to mark that close of probation. They need a story that they can trace through from the previous waymark to that waymark of AD 34. So reading on, when it comes to 2020, oh, Brother Mario, yes, you'll have access to this document. We'll be able to, we'll post it and we'll send it through to you. It's just a, I want to say translation. It's, yeah, it's just the, oh, what do you call it? No, it's not a translation. What's the word?
Transcript.
Yes, transcript. Thank you. Brain freeze. Thank you. Transcript. When it comes to 2020, what is the theme? What is prophecy telling us of the external events? What is the study that gives us 2020 in the first place? And it's the study of revolutions. Hopefully soon somebody will be taking on that study of the revolutions and going over it so we can be more familiar. But we understand that the revolution from 2001 to 2019, we mark a revolution from those dates. A revolution is a fight over who controls government. It isn't a neat history. So this revolution is really the overthrow of the US government, and it began in 2001 and it concludes in 2019. It's not a neat history. In the middle of that revolution, you have the presidency of Barack Obama. Victory goes back and forth between two sides until the election of Donald Trump, the overthrow of the Republican Party and the judicial branch. That all takes place from 2016 to 2019, particularly the judicial branch. So while you have different sides winning during a revolution, by November 9 of last year, you have a side that has won. And what is going to begin in 2020 is a rallying against that new system of government. So now November 9, 2019, new system of government. In this year, you're going to see a counter-revolution based on our understanding of all the revolutions of the past, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and the other revolution. You can put it in the chat. American Revolution isn't the one that gives us this template. So from 2018, we were expecting to see a powerful attack against this system of government. The German Revolution, thank you, Brother Brendan, high five. So from 2018, we were expecting to see a powerful attack against this system of government. People wondered if this was the US election. But the US election does not bear the right characteristics to fulfill that prediction. It does not galvanize the people worldwide. You can't mark a key date. It is something that occurs over years. Some looked to the impeachment, but the impeachment didn't even unify the Democrat Party, let alone galvanize people worldwide. And it did not have the correct timing. So we were looking for a worldwide unified attack on a system of government that was a response to what had been set up from 2001 to 2019. And the key revolution we take to understand that is the American Revolution. For years, the British had been oppressing the colonists. There is bloodshed. There are other fights. There's the Boston Massacre in 1770. But there is a key battle that unifies the colonists. It is known as the shot heard around the world. These sides had been at odds for a long time, but somehow it's this fight that's the tipping point. It unites the people with purpose and with passion. The Battle of Lexington and Concord. That's what was used in 2018 to demonstrate what we expected to see this year. True concord, passion, and a worldwide shockwave. Black men and women had died before George Floyd. There had been a long history of oppression and fighting. You have the Boston Massacre, you have Eric Garner. But somehow George Floyd was a tipping point. The recording of his death did go as a shockwave around the world. People united in concord with passion and purpose. The protests began. It sparked a counter-revolution against the system of government that had been set up by the Republican Party specifically. So a lot's been said on that point, but we mark this is May 25 as Concord. In the line of the great controversy, this is the death decree between Sunday law and the Second Advent. in the American Revolution, this is the Battle of Concord and Lexington, and we can mark other lines as well as this Battle of Concord. Concord meaning unity and agreement. That counter-revolution will not succeed. If it did, there would be no Sunday law. The judicial branch is gone. Biden is a centrist. He wants to spend more money on the police, not defund them. It is not going to succeed. The United States will come to an end at the Sunday law. And I guess in one sense, it's kind of, you know, we would like things to improve. We would like to think that it would succeed. You know, humanity obviously would like it to succeed, but we know that prophetically it can't. Prophetically, the people on both sides of the equation need to see that there's no hope, and that we will have the only message that will give them hope, and that is the hope in a different kingdom, in a kingdom that is not of this world. So it can't succeed, as horrible as that sounds. And we know that it isn't, that it's that revolution is not what's the word? It can't succeed because it's faulty anyway. So it's not it's just not a perfect answer. So May 25 is the beginning of the counter-revolution. It perfectly fulfills what we expected from the Battle of Lexington and Concord. It triggered civic unrest in America on a scale not seen since the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. over 50 years ago. Because we are out of time, I want to summarize. When we come back tomorrow, this will be the next study, next time, whenever, we are going to discuss Concord as a time period. So this will mark a beginning. And so we need to see its end, and it'll be a cause and effect. To understand Concord as a time period, we have gone back and looked at other waymarks. We have 5 witnesses of the nature of a story. What I would suggest is cause and effect. And here they're summarized. The defeat of the King of the South in 1989 can be traced from Hungary opening its borders to Berlin opening its border. The story of 2001 and the Third Woe, the terrorist attack, September 11, and the restraint of radical Islam, that is the Taliban, on November 9, that famous battle. 2016 and the election of Donald Trump. November 9, he takes the states he needs. December 19, the Electoral College votes. In 2018, this is Heraclea. Understand 2016 is the Battle of Ipsus. 2018 is Heraclea. September 21, Donald Trump decides he's going to pick a fight with Vladimir Putin. That is a cause. December 19, he loses that fight. It is an effect. And then in 2019, I've already suggested we need to not call this the story of Raphia in the same way that we think of it from Daniel chapter 11, because this isn't a fight for spheres of influence. This is an internal struggle in the United States, Western Front. This isn't Syria. It is not Afghanistan. We've already marked September 11. We just don't have a complete story yet. Whoops. I'm going to write 2020. And we'll write May 25. And what we want to work out is the effect. And all of this is to help us to understand 2020, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And Concord in application was May 25. When we come together next time, we want to understand this date, May 25. Understand the external history. And once we have our prophetic external framework, we can then start to discuss the internal experience of this movement and the increase of knowledge. So first, external framework, then internal experience. So that is the end of the study that Elder Tess presented on the 27th of October. It's a lead in to the next one where she'll continue on this here. If you haven't watched that series, I would highly recommend it, and start at the beginning. When we get another opportunity, we'll do the same process and go through the next study, but don't let that stop you re-watching it or watching it for the first time. So at that point, what I will do is I'm going to read Elder Tess's prayer, and then we will close in our own prayer. And what I might ask is, Brother John, are you with us today? John's with us? Think so? Brother John, would you like to close in prayer for us today? I'm going to read this prayer, and then if you wouldn't mind unmuting and praying our closing prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you that you do not wish to leave us ignorant, confused, or afraid. You prepared us for this pandemic, so when confronted, we don't have the fear that comes with confusion. I pray that you will continue to work with your people, especially those souls who are struggling in this time period, finding them divided from loved ones, in disagreement with those they are close to, perhaps personally weak in an understanding of this message. Perhaps they will get a glimpse of the beauty of what you are doing, even in the way your hand has traced prophetic events on a line with the sole purpose of establishing us in such a significant time period as the final scenes of the great controversy. I pray that each of us will play our part faithfully. In Jesus' name, amen.